I remember the cold most vividly, not the kind that makes you shiver from a draft, but a deep, bone-aching chill that settled right into my chest even though the thermostat was cranked high. It was always just after midnight. That's when I'd hear it, a faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood coming from inside the very walls of my bedroom. I'd pull the blankets tighter, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to convince myself it was just the old house settling or maybe a rat. But rats don't breathe. And whatever was in there, I could feel its gaze on me, even through the drywall. That cold, that scratching, the feeling of being watched, it was only the beginning. It wasn't long before I started seeing things that made me question my sanity, things that defied every single logical explanation I could conjure. I never believed in ghosts, not until it started happening to me. The things I started seeing, they weren't just fleeting shadows in the corner of my eye anymore. At first, they were just blurs, a smudge against the wall that vanished the moment I focused. I'd tell myself it was dust on my glasses or a trick of the light, but the cold would always deepen around me whenever it happened, a silent confirmation that my eyes weren't deceiving me. Then the blurs began to take shape, not distinct, never clear enough to identify, but I'd see movement, a ripple in the air like heat rising from pavement on a summer day, but it was winter and the house was freezing. Sometimes it would appear as a momentary distortion in the mirror, a dark, elongated figure standing just behind me, gone before I could even fully register it. My heart would pound, a frantic drum against my ribs, and I'd spin around, expecting to see something, someone, but there was always just the empty room, the oppressive silence, and that bone-deep chill that now seemed to permeate every corner of my home. The scratching inside the walls, it wasn't just after midnight anymore. It started happening at random, during the day, in the middle of a mundane task, a constant, irritating reminder that I wasn't alone. It grew louder, more frantic, like whatever was in there was clawing its way out, desperate to escape, or maybe desperate to get closer. I'd press my ear against the plaster, trying to discern a pattern, a meaning, but it was just a chaotic, relentless scraping. And then the whisper started. Faint, almost imperceptible, like dry leaves skittering across pavement in a gust of wind, but they were inside. Always just beyond the edge of understanding, a low, sibilant murmur that seemed to coil around my thoughts, making it impossible to concentrate, impossible to find peace. I'd snap my head up, convinced someone was speaking my name, but the house would fall silent, leaving me with only the echo of my own paranoia. One night, I woke up to an entirely new sound. Not the scratching, not the whispers, but a heavy, deliberate thud, as if something substantial had dropped onto the floor in the living room. My entire body tensed, every muscle screaming for me to stay still, but a morbid curiosity mixed with sheer terror forced me to swing my legs out of bed. The floorboards were icy beneath my bare feet. I crept towards the bedroom door, my breath catching in my throat, straining to hear over the frantic thumping of my own heart. Another thud, closer this time. And then a dragging sound, slow and labored, like something heavy being pulled across the old wooden floor. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, turning it with excruciating slowness. The cold in the hallway was intense, a physical pressure against my skin. I peeked out, my eyes darting into the darkened living room. The moonlight filtered weakly through the tall windows, casting long, eerie shadows. And there, in the center of the room, was an armchair. It was turned around, facing the opposite wall, away from the fireplace, away from the windows, away from me. But I knew, with an absolute certainty that froze the blood in my veins, that it had been facing the fireplace when I went to bed. And from behind that armchair, from the unseen space between its back and the wall, came a sound. A slow, ragged inhale, followed by an even slower, shuddering exhale. It was breathing. That deep, heavy, unnatural breathing I'd felt before, but now it was distinct, undeniable, and it was in my living room. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its gaze, a suffocating weight pressing down on me, pinning me to the spot. My mind screamed at me to run, to bolt the door, to call for help, but my feet were rooted to the floor. All I could do was stare at that overturned armchair, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of whatever was hiding behind it, waiting. The cold was a living thing now, wrapping around me, seeping into my very bones. I wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped, a frozen knot in my throat. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that whatever was in my house, it wasn't just watching anymore. It was moving things. It was making its presence known. And it was getting closer. The breathing continued, a slow, rhythmic pump of air that filled the oppressive silence of the living room. It was so close I could almost feel the phantom warmth of it, a sickening contrast to the Arctic chill that had seeped into my bones. My eyes were fixed on that armchair, begging it to move, to reveal whatever horror was lurking behind it, but it remained stubbornly still. And then, a tiny creak, so faint I almost convinced myself it was my own straining ears. But then, it happened again. The armchair, ever so slowly, began to pivot. Not a sudden jolt, but a deliberate, agonizingly slow rotation, as if an invisible hand was guiding it back to its original position, facing the fireplace. My breath hitched. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, threatening to burst through. I watched, mesmerized by terror, as the chair completed its turn. It was exactly as I had left it, empty, facing the fireplace. There was nothing behind it, nothing at all. But the breathing hadn't stopped. If anything, it was louder now, closer, no longer confined to the space behind the chair. It was everywhere. It was in the air around me, a cold, heavy presence that pressed in from all sides. My eyes darted around the room, frantic, searching for the source, but there was only the weak moonlight and the dancing shadows. Then, a whisper. Not the distant, dry leaf skittering from before. This was right next to my ear. A cold puff of air, a sibilant sound that felt less like a word and more like a name, being stretched, distorted, my name. The terror finally broke through my paralysis. I let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward, tripping over my own feet. My hands flew up, trying to ward off the unseen, trying to push away the icy tendrils that seemed to be reaching for me. I scrambled away from the living room, backing down the hallway, not daring to turn my back on that empty, silent space where the breathing still echoed. My bedroom door was a beacon of false safety. I flung myself inside, slamming it shut with a desperate thud that echoed through the quiet house. I fumbled for the lock, my fingers numb and clumsy, finally clicking the bolt into place. I leaned against the door, panting, my eyes wide, scanning every corner of the room. The cold was here too, not as intense as the living room, but a persistent, creeping dampness that clung to my skin. I tried to calm my racing heart, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a sleep-deprived hallucination, but the memory of that breathing, that whisper, was too vivid, too real. I backed away from the door, my gaze fixed on it, as if expecting it to burst open. I retreated to the far corner of my room, pulling my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to make myself small, invisible. The scratching started again then, from inside the wall, directly behind my head. Louder this time, more insistent, like whatever was in there knew exactly where I was, knew I was trapped. And then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible creak from the floorboards near my closet. A sound that shouldn't have been there. My eyes snapped to the closet door. It was slightly ajar. I knew I had closed it before bed. I always did.
The darkness within seemed to pulse, a deeper black against the faint moonlight, and from that darkness I felt it, that gaze, that suffocating, bone-chilling gaze. It was no longer outside the walls, it was in the room with me, and it was waiting. The cold within the room intensified, focusing on the closet. It wasn't just a draft, it was a heavy, suffocating pressure, like standing in a walk-in freezer. My eyes were glued to that sliver of darkness, that slightly open door. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stay frozen there, huddled in the corner, but my body wouldn't obey. My breath hitched in my throat, a dry, ragged sound. The scratching from the wall behind me had stopped. All I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart and the soft, almost imperceptible creak of the floorboards from inside the closet. It was moving. A shadow, deeper than the surrounding darkness, began to stretch from the gap in the closet door. It wasn't a distinct shape, more like an absence of light, a void that pulsed with an unseen energy. It elongated, snaking across the carpet, reaching towards me like a predatory tendril. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, pressing down on my chest until it was almost impossible to breathe. That deep, guttural breathing, the one I'd heard behind the armchair, was now emanating from the closet. A slow, deliberate sound that vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing it all away, praying it was a nightmare, a delusion brought on by exhaustion and fear. But when I opened them again, the shadow was closer, larger, and the closet door was no longer just ajar. It was slowly, silently widening. A sliver of the interior became visible, and in that inky blackness, I saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yet the presence was overwhelming, a suffocating weight that screamed, "Here." Then, a new sound. A soft, almost musical clink. My gaze dropped from the closet door to the floor just in front of it. There, lying on the carpet, was a small silver locket. My locket. The one my grandmother had given me, the one I always wore, the one that had been on my bedside table when I went to sleep. It gleamed faintly in the sparse moonlight, a stark, impossible reality. It hadn't fallen, it had been placed, moved from my table, carried across the room, and set down. And as I stared at it, the locket slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to slide across the carpet, inch by agonizing inch, back towards the opening of the closet. My mind reeled. This wasn't just sounds and shadows anymore. This was tangible. This was a direct interaction. It had taken something of mine. It wanted me to know it was there, that it could touch my things, that it could touch me.
The breathing intensified, becoming a low growl that seemed to resonate from everywhere at once. The air around me grew colder, so cold it burned, like inhaling shards of ice. I could feel individual hairs on my arms standing on end, a prickling sensation that traveled down my spine. Then, from the darkness of the closet, a hand emerged. Not a full hand, not distinct, but a shadowy outline, elongated and skeletal, slowly, deliberately reaching out. It was less a physical appendage and more a manifestation of pure shadow, yet I could feel its presence, its intention. It moved towards the locket, drawing it closer. My paralysis shattered. A raw, guttural scream tore from my throat, a sound I barely recognized as my own. I scrambled backward, away from the corner, away from the closet, stumbling over my own feet, desperately trying to put distance between myself and that awful reaching shadow. My back hit the wall opposite the closet with a painful thud.
My eyes were wide, fixed on the closet, on the shadow hand that now seemed to hover, not quite touching the locket, but holding it captive. The breathing stopped, the growl ceased. An unnatural silence fell over the room, broken only by my ragged gasps. And then, from the depths of the closet, a single, clear whisper, not just near my ear, but seeming to come from inside my head. Mine, mine. The single word echoed, not just in the room, but in the deepest, most primal part of my brain. It was a possessive whisper, a claim, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. My blood ran cold, colder than the air itself. The shadow hand, still hovering over my locket, seemed to tighten its grip on the air around it, a silent assertion of ownership. I couldn't move. My muscles had seized, locked in a rigid spasm of pure, unadulterated terror. My eyes, burning and dry, were fixed on that closet, on that impossible reaching void. Then the shadow hand retracted, slowly, deliberately, pulling the locket with it. It didn't lift it, didn't carry it. It seemed to absorb it, drawing it into the inky blackness of the closet opening. The silver glinted for a final agonizing second before vanishing completely. The closet door, which had been slowly widening, now began to close, not slamming shut, but drifting back into place with the same eerie slowness it had opened, as if guided by an unseen current. Click. The soft sound of the latch engaging was impossibly loud in the deathly silence that followed. The room was still. The breathing had stopped. The growl was gone. Even the oppressive cold seemed to recede slightly, leaving behind only the lingering, clammy residue of its presence. But the silence was worse. It was a heavy, watchful silence, pregnant with malice, a silence that screams, "I am here. I am waiting." My entire body was shaking uncontrollably, a violent tremor that rattled my teeth. Tears streamed down my face, hot trails on my frozen skin, but I couldn't even feel them. All I could feel was the hollow ache in my chest, where my locket, where my sense of safety used to be. I pushed myself away from the wall, scrambling to my feet with a desperate, clumsy urgency. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get out, to run, to escape this house, this room, this thing that had claimed a piece of me. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, stumbling towards the bedroom door. My hand reached for the doorknob, turning it frantically, pulling it open. The hallway was dark, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the suffocating dread of my bedroom. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran through the hallway, past the living room where the armchair sat innocently by the fireplace, a silent accomplice to my terror. I didn't care about my keys, my phone, nothing. All I wanted was out. My bare feet slapped against the cold wooden floorboards, a frantic rhythm against the pounding of my heart. The front door was a distant glimmer of hope. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers numb and useless, each click and turn an eternity. Finally, the last bolt slid back. I yanked the door open, gasping for the fresh, cold night air. I stumbled out onto the porch, collapsing onto the frozen steps, gulping down lungfuls of air that tasted sweet and clean after the putrid dread of the house. I looked back at my home, silhouetted against the weak moonlight, its windows dark and empty, yet I could feel its gaze on me, a lingering, possessive stare. It wasn't just the house anymore, it was the thing inside it, the thing that had taken my locket, the thing that had whispered, "Mine." It was no longer just a haunting, it was personal, and I knew with a chilling certainty that this was far from over. I had escaped the room, but I hadn't escaped it. Not really. The cold had followed me out, clinging to my skin, a constant reminder of what lay within. The cold bit into my bare skin, but it wasn't the refreshing chill of a winter night. It was the same invasive, bone-deep cold that had permeated my house, now clinging to me, a parasitic shroud. I huddled on the frozen steps, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my eyes wide and darting, scanning the empty street, the silent houses shrouded in darkness. I was out, but the terror hadn't released its grip. It was still there, a suffocating weight on my chest, a phantom gaze boring into my back, even as I stared straight ahead. My house loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the distant city lights.
It looked so normal, so utterly benign, yet I knew the malice that festered within its walls, the thing that had claimed my locket, that had whispered, "Mine." The word echoed in my head, a chilling affirmation of possession. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a cage for something ancient and hungry, and I had been its prey. The thought of going back inside, even for a coat, a phone, anything, made my stomach churn with a primal revulsion. I absolutely could not. My teeth chattered, partly from the cold, partly from the residual shock that still coursed through my veins. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? Yes, officer, there's a shadow monster in my closet that stole my locket and whispered "mine" to me. They'd lock me up. My friends? My family? Who would believe this? Who could even comprehend it? I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I pushed myself up, my legs still trembling, threatening to give out. My bare feet ached on the icy concrete. I needed to move. I needed to get away. But where? The car. My car was parked at the curb, a few yards down. It felt like a mile. Every step was an effort. Every rustle of leaves in the wind made me jump. I kept glancing back at the house, half expecting to see a face at the window, a shadowy form on the porch. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty windows reflecting the weak moonlight like 1,000 unblinking eyes. I reached my car, fumbling for the door handle. My hands were so cold and shaky, it took several attempts to grip it properly. I yanked it open, practically falling into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it with a desperate click. The interior of the car offered little comfort. It was still cold, the same penetrating chill that had followed me from the house. It hadn't stayed behind. It was here, with me, a silent passenger. I could feel its presence, a subtle pressure against the back of my neck, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air around me. My gaze fell to the passenger seat. There, lying innocently on the worn fabric, was a single, dry leaf. It was small, brittle, and brown. Not out of place, perhaps, but my heart hammered. I had cleaned the car yesterday. There were no leaves. And then I heard it, a faint, dry rustling sound like leaves skittering across pavement, but it was inside the car. A whisper. Not my name this time, but a low, sibilant sigh that seemed to curl around me, a breath on my skin that carried the same icy dread as the one from my bedroom. It was a sound of satisfaction, a sound that confirmed my deepest fear. It had followed me. It wasn't bound to the house. It was bound to me. And it was just getting started. I started the car, the engine roaring to life, a desperate attempt to drown out the growing silence within, the silence that now felt more menacing than any scream. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and drove. I drove away from my house, away from everything I knew, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that I was not alone. The cold was still there, a constant, terrifying reminder. It was with me. The cold bit into my bare skin, but it wasn't the refreshing chill of a winter night. It was the same invasive, bone-deep cold that had permeated my house, now clinging to me, a parasitic shroud. I huddled on the frozen steps, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my eyes wide and darting, scanning the empty street, the silent houses shrouded in darkness. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every distant sound a potential threat. I was out, but the terror hadn't released its grip. It was still there, a suffocating weight on my chest, a phantom gaze boring into my back, even as I stared straight ahead. My house loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the distant city lights. It looked so normal, so utterly benign, yet I knew the malice that festered within its walls, the thing that had claimed my locket, the thing that had whispered, "Mine." I couldn't stay here. My teeth chattered, not just from the cold, but from the residual shock that coursed through my veins. Where was I supposed to go? It was the middle of the night. My phone was inside. My keys were inside. Everything I owned, everything that defined my life, was trapped in that house with that thing. The thought of stepping back inside, even for a second, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My stomach churned, and I pressed a trembling hand against my mouth, trying to stifle the urge to vomit. It wasn't just the cold that clung to me, it was the smell too. A faint, metallic scent, like old blood and dust, that I hadn't noticed until now. A stench that seemed to emanate from my own skin. I pushed myself up, my legs wobbly, my muscles screaming in protest. I had to get away, anywhere. I started walking, barefoot on the icy pavement, not caring where I was going, just needing to put distance between myself and that ominous silhouette. Each step was agony, the frozen ground biting into my soles, but the physical pain was a welcome distraction from the psychological torment. I glanced over my shoulder, a primal instinct overriding my desire to keep moving forward. The house was still there, growing smaller with each block I put between us, but its presence felt no less potent. I could still feel that gaze, that suffocating weight following me. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It was with me. It was on me. My locket. The thought was a fresh stab of horror. My grandmother's locket. It had taken a part of me, a cherished memory, a tangible link to a loved one. Mine. The word echoed in my head, a chilling reminder of its possessiveness. It wasn't just a random haunting. It had chosen me. It had marked me. And now, out here in the cold, dark street, I realized the full, terrifying implication of that. I wasn't running from a house. I was running from something that had attached itself to me, something that had claimed me. I stumbled, catching myself on a lamppost, its dim light casting long, distorted shadows around me. My reflection stared back, pale and gaunt, eyes wide with unfathomable fear. And then, just for a fleeting second, in the periphery of that reflection, I saw it. A ripple in the air, a distortion, a smudge against the darkness that seemed to hover just behind my shoulder. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but the cold intensified around me, a silent, sickening confirmation. It hadn't stayed in the house. It had followed. It was here, waiting. I was no longer safe. There was no escape. My locket, and now it felt like it was claiming me. I tried to push myself up, to force my numb legs to carry me further, but a paralyzing dread rooted me to the spot. The cold that clung to me intensified, wrapping around my exposed skin like icy tendrils, squeezing the air from my lungs. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud and desperate in the stillness of the night. Then, from behind me, from the gaping maw of my open front door, I heard it. A soft click. My head snapped around, my eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The front door, which I had left flung wide open in my panicked escape,
was slowly, silently closing. It wasn't a slam, not a gust of wind. It was deliberate, agonizingly slow, as if an unseen hand was carefully guiding it shut. My breath caught in my throat. I watched, mesmerized by the horror, as the heavy wood met the frame with a soft, final thud. The latch clicked into place. Silence. A heavier, more suffocating silence than before. The house was a dark, impenetrable fortress now, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. And then, from behind that closed door, I heard the scratching. Not the faint, distant scratching from inside the walls, but a loud, frantic, tearing sound, as if something was clawing at the wood from the inside, directly behind the door. It was no longer trying to get out of the walls. It was trying to get to me. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't just in my head, or a cold puff of air.
It was a sibilant hiss that seemed to emanate from the very wood of the door, from the air around me, a chilling, guttural sound that vibrated through the frozen steps beneath me. Mine. It was louder, more possessive, laced with a raw, undeniable hunger. The door trembled, a deep, groaning sound, like old wood under immense pressure, echoed through the night. My eyes were fixed on the door, unblinking, as a faint, dark, shadowy outline began to press against the wood from the inside. It distorted the surface, pushing it outwards, a subtle bulge in the solid oak. It was trying to force its way out. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw, my voice a pathetic, choked whimper, trapped behind the ice in my chest. I clawed at the frozen steps, trying to drag myself away, but my muscles had locked, my body refusing to obey. The scratching intensified, a furious, tearing sound that made my teeth ache. The dark shape behind the door pressed harder, the groaning of the wood growing louder, higher pitched, like a desperate cry. And then a splintering crack. A thin line of darkness, like a jagged fissure, appeared in the wood of the door, right where the shadow was pressing. It widened, a black scar against the pale moonlight. Through that crack, an icy tendril of air escaped, carrying with it a putrid, stagnant scent, like damp earth and decay. And the whisper, closer now, more guttural, more chillingly distinct. Mine. You are mine. Then a single, shadowy, elongated finger, like the one that had taken my locket, slowly, deliberately pushed through the crack in the door. It stretched, impossibly long and thin, a skeletal extension of pure shadow, reaching towards me. It wasn't trying to open the door, it was trying to reach me, to touch me, to pull me back. My eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on that single dark digit. It twitched, as if sensing my absolute terror, relishing it. It moved with an unnatural slowness, an agonizing crawl across the doorframe, then out into the open air. It was no longer just a shadow, it was tangible, a cold, skeletal manifestation of pure malice. It touched the wrought iron railing of the porch, just inches from my outstretched hand. A searing, arctic cold shot through me, even though it wasn't touching my skin directly. The railing itself frosted over instantly, where the finger made contact, a delicate filigree of ice blooming across the metal. That was it, the final break. My paralysis shattered. A raw, guttural scream tore from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated primal terror. I pushed myself up, using every ounce of adrenaline, every last fiber of my being. I stumbled backward, falling off the steps, scrambling on all fours across the frozen lawn. My bare hands scraped against the icy grass and sharp frozen earth, but I felt nothing but the desperate need to escape.
The shadowy finger retracted, slowly, deliberately, back through the crack. The door groaned once more, then fell silent. The crack remained, a jagged scar on the otherwise pristine wood, a permanent mark. I didn't look back. I just ran, across the lawn, onto the sidewalk, into the darkness of the street. My bare feet were numb, my lungs burning, but I didn't stop. I just ran, away from the house, away from the cold, away from the whisper, away from the thing that had claimed me. But I knew, deep in my soul, that I hadn't escaped. It let me go, for now. It wanted me to know, it wanted me to remember. And it was waiting. It was always waiting. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out beneath me. I don't know how far I went, or in what direction. The world was a blur of darkness and cold. I eventually collapsed, gasping for air, the icy pavement biting into my skin. But the cold, that deep, bone-aching cold, it wasn't just the winter night. It was still with me. It was inside me. My house, my home, it's just a dark smudge on the horizon now, a memory that sends shivers down my spine. But it's not the house I ran from, it's what was inside it. And, more terrifyingly, it's what came out of it. It claimed my locket, a piece of my past, but it didn't stop there. It claimed me. Mine, it whispered. And I know it meant it. I'm out here now, exposed, vulnerable. I have nothing but the clothes on my back and the indelible mark of its presence. Every shadow holds a threat, every rustle of leaves a whisper. I can't look at the darkness the same way. I can't feel truly alone, not anymore. It's always there, a phantom weight, a chilling breath on my neck. It watches. It waits. They say some places are haunted, but what about people? What about those of us who carry the echoes of something truly dreadful, something that attaches itself to your very soul? What do you do when the haunting isn't in a house, but in your own skin? When escape is just an illusion, and every moment is a countdown to its return. Have you ever felt that inescapable dread, that feeling of being watched even when you're utterly alone? I live with it now, the knowledge that it's out there, or worse, right here, always, waiting for the right moment, waiting to finish what it started. I can never go back to who I was. That person died tonight, scrambling across frozen grass, leaving everything behind. And the new me? The new me is just trying to survive, one terrified breath at a time. Because I know now, true terror isn't just seeing a ghost. True terror is when the ghost sees you and decides it wants to keep you.